The hall was quiet except for the faint rustling of papers and the soft murmur of voices as people settled into their seats. The large chandelier hung in the center, casting a warm glow over the polished wooden floor and the rows of neatly arranged chairs. Today was a special day. It was the day of the local orchestra showcase, an event that brought together the finest musicians in the city. Every year, the hall would fill with people eager to see both familiar faces and new talent. The excitement was palpable, but underneath it all, there was a sense of tension. The conductor was standing at the podium, adjusting his sheet music and tapping his baton lightly on the stand. He was a man known for his strict approach and precise expectations. Every movement, every note, and every pause mattered to him. In his eyes, the orchestra was his creation, and nothing could disturb the perfection he envisioned. Today, he felt particularly confident. He had prepared the orchestra for weeks, making sure every section was in sync. He believed that no one could challenge his authority or outshine him as the audience began to take their seats. A young woman quietly entered the hall. She carried her piano sheet music in a worn folder and moved with a calm, almost invisible presence. She didn't draw attention to herself, but there was a subtle strength in her posture. She walked toward the piano at the side of the stage, acknowledging a few friendly nods from musicians she knew. Most people didn't notice her, including the conductor. He barely glanced at her, assuming she was just another guest pianist with a little experience. She took a deep breath and sat at the piano bench. Her fingers hovered above the keys for a moment as she adjusted her posture and closed her eyes briefly. There was a quiet confidence about her, a sense that she had faced challenges and hardships, and yet she was undeterred. Her calmness contrasted sharply with the conductor's strict and rigid demeanor. He looked at her with a hint of amusement, convinced that her performance would be nothing more than a brief, unremarkable moment in the showcase. The rehearsal began, and the orchestra played their opening piece. The conductor's baton moved swiftly and sharply, guiding the musicians through every crescendo and pause. The sound filled the hall, rich and controlled. The young woman watched carefully, her eyes following the rhythm and energy of the music. She was not just observing. She was absorbing every detail, preparing herself to complement the orchestra in her own way. When it was time for her solo, the conductor gave her a curt nod, his expression unreadable. He expected her to stumble, to falter under the pressure of performing in front of such an audience. She placed her hands on the keys, feeling the familiar texture beneath her fingers. Her heart beat steadily, not from fear, but from anticipation. She began to play softly, each note deliberate, each movement intentional. At first, it was gentle, almost hesitant, but there was a warmth in the sound that immediately drew attention. The audience, though quiet, began to notice. The music seemed to flow effortlessly from her fingers, telling a story without words. The conductor frowned slightly, surprised that she was keeping pace, and in some moments, even enhancing the orchestra's sound. He tapped his baton more firmly, trying to regain control. But the young woman continued, her music rising and falling naturally, full of emotion and depth. It was clear that she had a connection with the piano that went beyond mere practice. Every note carried a piece of her soul, and the audience could feel it. Whispers started among the people in the seats. Some were intrigued by her calm presence. Others were captivated by the unexpected beauty of the music. The conductor's confidence wavered slightly. He realized that he had underestimated her. The young woman was not just playing the notes. She was telling a story, one that resonated with anyone who listened. There was a sincerity and authenticity in her performance that no rigid structural structure could contain. As the piece continued, the hall seemed to hold its breath. The young woman's fingers moved with grace and precision, creating a melody that was both powerful and tender. The conductor, usually unshakable, felt a mix of admiration and unease. He could see the audience leaning forward in their seats, completely absorbed in the music. The energy in the room shifted. It was no longer just a showcase. It had become a shared experience between the pianist and everyone present. After the piece ended, there was a brief moment of silence, as if the hall itself was processing what had just happened. Then, gradually, the audience erupted into applause. It was spontaneous, heartfelt, and overwhelming. People stood, clapping and cheering, unable to contain their admiration. The young woman smiled softly, acknowledging the response without arrogance. She had not come for praise, but for the joy of sharing her music. The conductor stepped back, momentarily speechless. He had thought he would dominate the performance, that his orchestra would be the center of attention. Instead, he found himself witnessing something extraordinary. The young woman had not only matched his expectations, but had surpassed them entirely. The music had a life of its own, independent of control, rules, or authority. It was a reminder that talent and passion could not be constrained, and that sometimes the quietest presence could have the loudest impact. Backstage, other musicians whispered to each other, expressing their amazement. They spoke of her skill, her expression, and the way she seemed to command the room without saying a word. The young woman gathered her sheet music and prepared for her next piece, calm and focused. She didn't let the applause distract her. She was already thinking about the story she wanted to tell through her next performance. In that moment, it was alive with possibilities. People realized that music was not just about technique or control. It was about emotion, connection, and honesty. The young woman had reminded everyone of this truth. Even the conductor, proud and meticulous, could not deny the power of her presence. It was a lesson he would not forget, a moment that would remain with him long after the applause faded. As the audience settled back into their seats, there was a sense of anticipation for what was to come. The young woman's performance had set a new standard, one that could not be measured by rules or expectations. She had arrived quietly, almost unnoticed, and had changed the atmosphere of the entire hall. The first part of the day ended with a sense of awe, leaving everyone eager to hear more. It was clear that this was only the beginning. The young woman had a story to tell, and the hall, the orchestra, and the audience were all part of it now. Her music had the power to move people, to challenge assumptions, and to remind everyone that true talent often comes from persistence, resilience, and a deep love for what one does. The stage was set, and the journey had just begun, promising moments that would shock, inspire, and leave lasting impressions on all who were present. The young woman had arrived at the hall quietly, but her story began long before she ever set foot on a stage. She grew up in a modest neighborhood, a place where the streets were busy with the noise of everyday life, and where dreams often seemed far out of reach. Her family had always been supportive in their own way. They were not wealthy and could not afford expensive lessons or instruments. The piano in her home was old, with a few keys that stuck and a faded finish. But it was enough for her to begin learning on her own. She would spend hours every day after school, her fingers tracing the worn keys, trying to make music out of what she had. Her parents worked long hours, often coming home tired and unable to provide guidance in music. She learned to listen carefully to every sound around her, the birds outside the window, the hum of the refrigerator, the rhythm of footsteps, and she tried to mimic these patterns on the piano. Her first melodies were simple, often clumsy, but each note carried determination. She knew that she had to rely on herself if she wanted to grow as a musician. Even though her friends were out playing or enjoying themselves, she remained in her small room, practicing quietly and steadily. There was a sense of discipline in her routine, born out of necessity and desire. In school, she often faced discouragement. Teachers would tell her that she should focus on academics or other practical skills, that music was a hobby and not a career path. She received praise from some, but there were others who laughed at her persistence. She would come home and cry quietly, feeling frustrated and misunderstood. But she never stopped playing. In fact, those moments of doubt became fuel for her determination. Each tear she shed seemed to translate into more passion when she played the piano. Giving depth and emotion to every note she touched, her teenage years were challenging. She had to juggle schoolwork, part-time jobs, and endless hours of practice. There were times when she questioned herself, wondering if all the sacrifices were worth it. She watched others around her move forward, achieving success in various ways, while she felt stuck in a cycle of practice and struggle. But she discovered something that kept her going. Music was her refuge. When she sat at the piano, nothing else mattered. The outside world faded, and she could express feelings she could not put into words. It was in those moments that she felt alive, and that sense of purpose became unshakable. She sought out every opportunity to learn, often teaching herself through books, listening to recordings of great pianists, and attending small local performances whenever she could. She observed carefully how professionals moved, how they expressed emotion through their fingers, and how they communicated with the audience. She did not have a teacher guiding her every move, but she learned by watching and listening, developing a unique style that was all her own. She experimented with different tempos, dynamics, and techniques, sometimes making mistakes, sometimes discovering something beautiful she had never thought of before. Her dedication often set her apart from peers. Social invitations were declined, time with friends was limited, and she was often seen as distant or unusual. But she understood that her path required sacrifices. Each evening, she would sit at her piano in the quiet of her room, replaying pieces she had heard, adding her own twists and trying to perfect them. Her fingers sometimes ached, and her eyes grew tired from the long hours of practice, but she never gave up. She found comfort in the routine, sense of stability that the world outside her room often could not offer. She also faced financial hardships. There were times when she could not afford new sheet music or a proper piano bench. She had to make do with worn-out materials, scribbling notes in the margins of borrowed books, and improvising techniques when keys were broken. These limitations forced her to be creative, to find new ways to express the music she loved. It was a lesson that would later serve her well. True skill is not about having the best tools, but about making the most of what you have. Despite the obstacles, she found moments of inspiration. A small radio in the corner of a local store would play classical pieces that she could listen to while running errands. Occasionally, a neighbor who had once been a music teacher would stop by to give brief advice or encouragement. These moments were fleeting but powerful. They reminded her that there were people who recognized her potential, even if the world at large did not. These small connections, combined with her own perseverance, shaped the person she was becoming. As she grew older, her determination to perform in public grew as well. She started participating in small community events, playing for local gatherings, schools, and charity functions. Each performance was nerve-wracking, and she often doubted herself beforehand. But the moment her fingers touched the keys and the first notes filled the room, the anxiety would fade. She could see the faces of the audience change as they listened, some surprised, some moved to tears. These moments reinforced her belief that music was not just about skill. It was about connection. It was about touching hearts and sharing something that went beyond words. Her reputation slowly grew in the local music scene. People began to talk about the quiet girl who played the piano with extraordinary emotion. Invitations to perform at more prominent venues started to come, and with each one, she gained more confidence. Yet, she remained humble, always focused on the music itself, rather than fame or recognition. She knew that her journey was about expression, about authenticity, and about the ability to convey feelings that could not be captured in ordinary conversation. The day she arrived at the concert hall for the showcase, she carried all of these experiences with her. Every struggle, every late night, every small victory had led her to this moment. Sitting quietly at the piano, she felt the weight of her journey, but it was not a burden. It was a source of strength. She understood that the music she was about to play was more than notes on a page. It was a reflection of her life, her perseverance, and her unwavering dedication. Even before she began to play, the conductor underestimated her. He saw her as another participant, someone who would follow his directions and stay within the expected boundaries. He did not know the depth of her experience, the countless hours she had spent perfecting her craft, or the emotional maturity she brought to her performance. He assumed that he controlled the moment, that he could guide the orchestra and everyone around him to a predictable outcome. He was confident, almost arrogantly so, in his ability to dominate the showcase. The young woman, however, was ready. She had faced far greater challenges than a conductor's expectations. She had learned to rise above doubt, criticism, and obstacles that might have discouraged others. Every note she played would carry her history, her struggles, and her triumphs. She understood that the stage was not a place to compete, but a place to communicate. And so, as she prepared for her solo, she felt a calm clarity. She knew that the music she was about to create would be true to her, and that authenticity could not be ignored. Her journey to this stage had taught her patience. She had learned to wait for the right moment, to observe carefully, and to act with purpose. These skills were now being tested in the live setting of the hall. She could sense the conductor's focus on control, his strict adherence to rules, and his expectation of compliance. But she also knew that true artistry could not be forced or contained. Her performance would not be about following instructions. It would be about expressing the music she had cultivated over years of dedication. As the orchestra prepared to play alongside her, she closed her eyes briefly, letting the memories of her journey fill her mind. She recalled the nights of quiet practice, the small triumphs, the mistakes that taught her resilience, and the fleeting moments of encouragement that kept her moving forward. Each memory added depth to her understanding of the piece she was about to perform. She was not just playing a composition. She was telling a story, one that had been written through her life's experiences. The audience, unaware of her history, waited with anticipation. They saw a quiet, unassuming pianist, and most assumed that the performance would be pleasant but ordinary. Few could have guessed the depth and richness that lay beneath her calm exterior. She understood that perception often underestimates true talent, and that sometimes the most impactful performances come from those who appear unassuming or overlooked. When the moment came for her to begin, she placed her fingers on the keys, feeling the familiar connection that had been her companion for years. The first notes were soft, deliberate, and infused with emotion. Each movement of her fingers was precise yet fluid, reflecting both discipline and creativity. The hall, filled with people who had come to witness the showcase, gradually began to recognize that something remarkable was unfolding before them. Even the conductor, confident in his expectations, felt a subtle shift. He noticed the calm authority in her movements, the way she interacted with the piano as though it were an extension of herself. There was no hesitation, no doubt, only a quiet strength that demanded attention without force. For the first time, he realized that he might not control this moment entirely, that the music had a life of its own, shaped by the young woman's years of dedication and emotional investment as she played. Her music told a story that transcended the notes themselves. The audience could feel her journey in every chord, every pause, every crescendo. They were transported, moved in ways that were both unexpected and unforgettable. The young woman had brought her history, her struggles, her triumphs to life through the piano, and the hall was captivated. She had arrived quietly, carrying a lifetime of preparation, and was now leaving an indelible mark on everyone present. In that moment, she understood that all the hardships she had faced were not obstacles, but building blocks. Each challenge had strengthened her, each failure had taught her resilience, and each small victory had given her confidence. Hall was still buzzing from the previous performances. But all eyes were now on the young woman sitting at the piano. The conductor, who had been so confident just moments before, was now watching her intently, trying to gauge how he could influence the performance. He believed that his experience and authority would guide the orchestra and the soloist. But he was beginning to realize that she was not an ordinary pianist. There was a calm determination about her that made him pause, even if only for a moment. As she placed her fingers on the keys, the orchestra prepared to accompany her. The tension in the room was palpable. Musicians exchanged quick, curious glances, sensing that this performance might be unlike any they had witnessed before. The audience sat quietly, leaning forward in anticipation, unaware of the story that had brought her to this moment. Her presence on stage was understated, almost invisible, yet it carried a weight that was impossible to ignore. She began to play, softly at first, letting the notes flow naturally. Each tone seemed to tell a part of her life, a reflection of the struggles. The late nights, the small victories, and the moments of quiet perseverance. Her fingers moved with precision, but there was a fluidity that made the music breathe. The conductor raised his baton, signaling the orchestra to join, but he did so cautiously, as if he were testing the waters. He did not yet realize that the music she was creating could not be confined by rigid rules or controlled by authority. As the orchestra joined, the harmony was immediate. Her music seemed to guide the ensemble, leading them rather than following the conductor's cues. The rhythm and expression she brought to the piece were nuanced and deeply emotional, drawing the musicians into her interpretation. Even those who had played under strict direction for years could feel the shift. The music became alive, moving organically with moments of softness that contrasted with sudden surges of power. The audience was captivated, some unable to contain their surprise at the depth and skill on display. The conductor's expression changed as he watched. He had expected to dominate the performance, but instead, he found himself observing someone who could not be directed in the usual way. He raised his baton more firmly, attempting to assert control, but the young woman continued to play with unwavering focus. It became clear that the music was no longer about following instructions or maintaining structure. It was about connection, emotion, and storytelling. The orchestra, guided subtly by her lead, responded with energy and feeling, creating a performance that was greater than the sum of its parts. As the piece progressed, the audience began to notice the subtleties in her playing. There were moments of gentle reflection, notes that lingered with a soft melancholy, and others that burst forth with passionate intensity. The hall seemed to respond to every nuance. People leaned forward, some closing their eyes to absorb the full experience. Whispers of admiration passed through the crowd, though quietly, as if no one wanted to interrupt the spell she had cast. It was not just technical skill that impressed them. It was the emotion she conveyed, the story she told through her fingertips. The young woman's eyes remained partially closed, but she was fully aware of her surroundings. She could sense the conductor's unease, the orchestra's tentative shifts, and the audience's growing captivation. Yet, she did not let these observations distract her. She was immersed in the music, allowing her years of practice and experience to guide every movement. Each phrase was deliberate, each pause intentional. As she shaped the piece with both skill and heart, the conductor, now realizing he could not fully control the moment, adjusted his approach. Instead of imposing strict direction, he began to follow, matching the dynamics and timing she set. It was a subtle shift, but it allowed the music to flow more naturally. He could feel the energy in the hall changing. What he had expected to be a simple performance had transformed into something extraordinary. A shared experience between the soloist, the orchestra, and the audience. It was a powerful lesson in humility, as he witnessed firsthand the impact of someone who played not for recognition, but for the love of the music itself. The young woman's performance continued to evolve. She introduced unexpected variations in tempo and dynamics, weaving in pauses that allowed the music to breathe and resonate. The audience was spellbound, sensing the depth of her understanding and the honesty behind each note. The orchestra adapted, creating layers of sound that complemented her solo without overshadowing it. The hall was alive with a unique energy, a mixture of tension, anticipation, and awe. Every note seemed to reach the hearts of those listening, creating a bond between performer and audience that went beyond words. As the piece reached its midpoint, the young woman began to build intensity. Her fingers moved swiftly across the keys, creating passages of rapid movement that demanded attention and focus. The conductor, who had initially thought of her as a subordinate participant, now watched in astonishment. He could see the skill, the precision, and the emotion that she brought to every note. The orchestra responded, rising to the challenge, and the sound in the hall became richer, more complex, deeply moving. The audience could feel the story unfold through the music. Some were drawn to the gentle, reflective moments, while others were captivated by the bursts of energy and power. The young woman's ability to convey emotion through her playing created a dynamic experience that held everyone's attention. People who had been skeptical or indifferent at the beginning now found themselves completely absorbed. Even seasoned musicians in the orchestra were impressed by her interpretation. Realizing that her years of dedication and self-guided practice had culminated in a performance that transcended technical skill. Throughout the piece, the young woman maintained a calm and focused presence. She did not show signs of nervousness or distraction. Instead, She embodied the music, allowing it to flow naturally and effortlessly. The hall seemed to breathe with her, every note resonating with authenticity and depth. The audience sensed the honesty in her performance, and it created a powerful emotional connection that was impossible to ignore. The conductor, observing her command of the music, began to reflect on his assumptions. He had believed that experience, authority, preparation alone could dominate the performance. But he now understood that true artistry could not be imposed or controlled. It required passion, understanding, and a deep connection to the music. The young woman had all of these qualities, and she demonstrated them with a quiet confidence that left him both humbled and inspired. As the performance continued, the young woman reached the climactic sections of the piece. Her playing grew more intense, each note striking with clarity and purpose. The orchestra followed, creating a powerful and harmonious blend that filled the hall. The audience was completely engaged, some sitting in rapt attention, others closing their eyes to fully experience the sound. There were moments of awe and surprise as the young woman introduced subtle variations that showcased her creativity and mastery. The conductor, who had expected to dominate the performance, now found himself participating in a collaborative experience. He guided the orchestra with sensitivity, following her lead, and witnessing the transformation of a simple performance into a remarkable musical journey. It was a lesson in humility, patience, and the power of allowing talent to shine without constraint. As the piece approached its conclusion, the young woman slowed the tempo, allowing each note to linger and resonate. She infused the final moments with emotion and grace, leaving the audience breathless. The hall was filled with a sense of anticipation as everyone waited to see how she would conclude the performance. With a final deliberate chord, she ended the piece, and for a brief moment, there was silence. It was a silence full of awe, respect, and amazement. Then slowly, the audience erupted into applause. The reaction was overwhelming, spontaneous, and heartfelt. People rose to their feet, clapping and cheering, unable to contain their admiration. The young woman smiled softly, acknowledging the response without arrogance. She had played not for praise, but for the love of music and the joy of sharing her story through sound. Backstage, musicians whispered to one another, amazed at the depth and quality of the performance. The conductor, usually proud and commanding, felt a mix of admiration, surprise, and humility. He had underestimated her, and now he could not deny the power and brilliance she had brought to the hall. Her music had captivated everyone present, creating an unforgettable experience that would be remembered long after the applause faded. The young woman gathered her sheet music and prepared for the next segment of the showcase. She remained calm and focused, not allowing the excitement or attention to distract her. She understood that each performance was an opportunity to express herself, to communicate, and to connect with others. The hall had witnessed a transformation, not only in the music, but in the way people perceived talent, dedication, and the power of authenticity. In that moment, it was clear that the young woman had changed the atmosphere of the entire hall. Her performance was not just a display of skill. It was a testament to resilience, perseverance, and the ability to rise above expectations. She had arrived quietly, almost unnoticed, and had captivated everyone with her artistry. The first part of her story was complete, but it was only the beginning. The journey of her music and the impact it would have on those who experienced it was just unfolding. The applause from the previous piece had barely faded. When the young woman prepared herself for the next segment, she adjusted the bench slightly, took a deep breath, and let her fingers hover over the keys. There was no rush, no sign of nervousness, only focus and a quiet sense of purpose. The audience, still buzzing from the first performance, watched intently. There was a sense that something extraordinary was about to unfold. Even the conductor, who had grown accustomed to being in control, felt a mix of curiosity and apprehension. He had not expected her to bring such depth to the stage, and now he understood that he had underestimated her. The next piece she had chosen was more complex, demanding both technical skill and emotional expression. It was a composition that many experienced pianists would approach with caution. Yet, for her, it was an opportunity to convey the richness of her journey. Each note, each chord, carried layers of meaning, The audience could not yet grasp the full extent of what they were about to witness, but they felt the tension, the anticipation, and the presence of someone who truly understood her instrument. As she began, the first few notes were soft and deliberate. There was a warmth in her playing that immediately drew the audience in. The melody rose and fell naturally, capturing attention without force or extravagance. The conductor, who had once assumed he would dictate the performance, now found himself watching in awe. His baton moved almost instinctively, following the nuances she created rather than imposing structure. The orchestra responded to her lead, adapting with precision and sensitivity. There was a harmony in the hall that transcended expectations. Her performance gradually gained momentum. She introduced subtle variations in tempo, softening certain passages and accentuating others with unexpected intensity. The music seemed to breathe with her, flowing organically and carrying a narrative that was both personal and universal. The audience, though silent, was captivated. Some leaned forward in their seats, others closed their eyes, allowing the music to envelop them completely. There was a sense that they were witnessing a story unfold, one that could not be told through words alone. The conductor, who had initially seen her as a subordinate participant, now felt a mix of admiration and challenge. He realized that the young woman's talent could not be contained by his authority or expectations. She had a mastery over the piano that went beyond technical skill. It was an emotional command that drew everyone into her world. For the first time, he felt that his role was not to dominate, but to support, to follow, and to appreciate the artistry that was unfolding before him. The piece continued to evolve, moving from delicate, introspective passages to sections of dramatic intensity. Her fingers moved swiftly, yet with grace, striking notes that resonated deeply in the hall. Every chord was intentional, every pause meaningful. The music reflected not only her technical ability, but also the depth of her life experiences, the long nights of practice, the moments of doubt, the triumphs that came quietly. And the resilience that had carried her this far, the orchestra played in harmony with her. Following the subtle cues in her timing and expression, musicians who had once played under strict direction now found themselves responding to her interpretation, adapting instinctively to the flow of her performance. The conductor, too, adjusted, realizing that the music was not about rigid control, but about collaboration and mutual understanding. There was a synergy developing on stage, a rare alignment that made the performance feel alive and spontaneous. The audience was visibly moved. People who had come expecting a routine showcase, now experiencing a performance that was extraordinary in its honesty and power. The young woman's ability to convey emotion through the piano created a connection that transcended age, background, and expectation. Whispers of awe passed quietly through the hall, but no one wanted to interrupt the spell she had created. They were witnessing something rare, a true artist, communicating directly with their hearts. As she progressed through the piece, she began to explore more challenging passages, demanding both speed and precision. Her fingers danced across the keys with an almost effortless skill, creating a sound that was both powerful and delicate. The hall seemed to respond, the acoustics amplifying the richness of each note. Every element of the performance dynamics, timing, and expression was under her control. Yet it felt natural, unforced, and organic. The conductor watched closely, realizing that he was experiencing a performance unlike any he had ever encountered. He had expected to dominate, to guide the orchestra, and to impress the audience through authority. Instead, he was witnessing a young woman whose talent, dedication, and emotional depth were transforming the entire hall. The experience was humbling, and he felt a deep respect for her abilities. He understood that this performance would leave a lasting impression on everyone present. The young woman, fully absorbed in her music, was unaware of the magnitude of her impact. She did not seek attention or validation. She played for the joy of expression and the fulfillment that came from connecting with the piano. Each note was a reflection of her journey, her perseverance, and her understanding of the music. The audience, however, could sense the sincerity and depth behind every sound, and it moved them profoundly. The middle section of the piece, introduced a series of intricate patterns, requiring precise coordination between the hands and an acute awareness of timing. The young woman executed these passages flawlessly, demonstrating both technical mastery and emotional interpretation. The orchestra followed her lead, their sound blending seamlessly with hers, creating a performance that was both cohesive and dynamic. The conductor, while still present, recognized that the performance was no longer about his control, but about allowing the artist to shine. As the music reached its climax, the intensity increased. The young woman's playing became more expressive, each note carrying a weight of emotion that resonated with the audience. The hall seemed to vibrate with the sound, capturing the attention of everyone present. People were fully immersed, some leaning forward in their seats, others holding their breath as the performance unfolded. The connection between the pianist, the orchestra, and the audience was palpable, a testament to the power of authentic expression. The conductor, now completely absorbed in the performance, felt a mixture of awe and humility. He had never witnessed a soloist command both the orchestra and the audience in such a profound way. He realized that his role was not to dominate, but to support, to follow, and to appreciate the artistry before him. The young woman had challenged his assumptions, demonstrating that true talent and passion could not be confined or controlled. The final passages of the piece required a delicate balance of speed, power, and emotion. The young woman executed them with precision, her fingers moving swiftly yet gracefully across the keys. Each note was deliberate, each pause intentional. The audience, completely captivated, could feel the culmination of her journey through the music. It was a performance that spoke not only of skill, but of resilience, dedication, and the power of human expression. As the piece drew to a close, the young woman slowed the tempo, allowing the final notes to resonate fully. The hall seemed to hold its breath, each person savoring the ending, feeling the weight and beauty of the performance. The last chord echoed through the space, lingering long after her fingers had left the keys. For a moment there was silence, a shared pause as everyone absorbed the magnitude of what had just occurred. Then slowly, the audience erupted into applause. The response was immediate, heartfelt, and overwhelming. People rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, and expressing their admiration. The young woman smiled gently, acknowledging the audience without pride or arrogance. She had not played for recognition, but for the joy of music, the satisfaction of sharing her story, and the connection she had created with those listening. The conductor, still processing the performance, approached her quietly backstage. He had been humbled, inspired, and deeply moved. For the first time in his career, he recognized that his assumptions and authority had been challenged in a way that left a lasting impression. He offered a respectful nod, a silent acknowledgement of her extraordinary talent. She responded with a calm smile, understanding the significance of the moment without needing words. The musicians backstage spoke in hushed tones, expressing their amazement and admiration. They had witnessed a performance that transcended technical skill, one that communicated emotion, history, and human experience. The young woman, though aware of the impact, remained focused. Preparing herself for the next opportunity to express her art, she understood that each performance was a chance to connect, to tell a story, and to create something meaningful. As the hall slowly emptied, the energy remained, a lingering sense of awe and inspiration. The young woman's performance had not only captivated the audience, but had transformed the atmosphere of the entire showcase. She had arrived quietly, almost unnoticed, and had left an indelible mark. Her music had demonstrated that true talent, passion, and dedication could not be underestimated. It was a powerful reminder that perseverance and authenticity often create moments that are unforgettable, moments that resonate long after the music has ended and the quiet that followed. She packed her sheet music and carefully left the stage. She walked through the hall, aware of the eyes and whispers of admiration, but remaining composed. Her journey was not about fame or recognition. It was about the music, the stories she could tell through it, and the connections she could create. She understood that her performance had changed perceptions, inspired others, and left an impression that would endure. That day, she had not only played the piano, but had demonstrated the power of dedication, resilience, and authenticity. The audience, the orchestra, and even the conductor had witnessed something rare and profound. Her music had transformed. The standing ovation had slowly settled and the audience began to leave. The young woman remained seated at the piano for a few moments, letting the silence fill the hall. The echoes of her music still lingered, vibrating in the walls and the hearts of those who had listened. She did not rush to leave or seek attention. She simply allowed herself to absorb the atmosphere, to reflect on the journey that had brought her here. This performance, more than any before, was the culmination of years of quiet determination, countless hours of practice, and a deep love for music that no obstacle had ever diminished. The conductor approached her once the hall had cleared, his expression one of mixed admiration, humility, and curiosity. He had spent much of his career guiding, correcting, and directing musicians, believing that control was essential for creating harmony. Yet now, standing before her, he realized how limited his perspective had been. Her performance had been more than technically flawless. It had carried emotion, history, and soul. He knew that she had challenged his assumptions in the most profound way, and it left him quietly inspired. "You're playing. It's remarkable," he said, his voice low but sincere. "I underestimated you. I thought I could direct the music, but it seems the music was always yours." She smiled softly, accepting his words without pride. "Thank you," she replied simply. "I play because it is what I love. The music belongs to everyone, not just the conductor." There was a moment of understanding between them. He realized that his role was not to dominate, but to support and recognize talent when it revealed itself in unexpected ways. She, on the other hand, had never sought validation from authority or recognition. She had learned long ago to trust herself, her skill, and her dedication. That trust was evident in every note she played, and it had touched everyone in the hall. As the orchestra packed up and musicians chatted backstage, she quietly gathered her belongings. People who had witnessed the performance approached her, expressing admiration and curiosity. Some were fellow musicians who had struggled under the strict direction of the conductor and found her performance inspiring. Others were members of the audience who had felt deeply moved. Everyone wanted to understand how such a young, seemingly quiet pianist could create such a powerful experience. She listened politely, responding with gentle words, never boasting, simply sharing that her journey had been long and full of dedication. Later that evening, she stepped outside into the cool night air. The city lights glimmered in the distance, and she took a moment to breathe deeply. Her mind wandered back through the years, the small room where she had practiced for hours, the broken keys of the old piano, the quiet encouragements, and the countless moments of self-doubt that had ultimately shaped her resilience. Every struggle, every tear, every moment of quiet perseverance had led her to this point. Her music was not just skill, it was a testament to her life, her choices, and her commitment to her passion. In the days that followed, the impact of her performance became more evident. Invitations arrived from local music societies, schools, and small concert venues. People wanted her to play, not because of fame, but because her music had the rare ability to connect with listeners on a deeply emotional level. She approached each opportunity carefully, understanding that her goal was never to impress, but to communicate through her artistry. Each stage became a canvas, and the piano was her medium to share her story, inspire others, and evoke emotion. She also began mentoring younger musicians who sought guidance. They were often intimidated by the pressure of performance and the strict expectations of teachers or conductors. She shared her experience, emphasizing the importance of patience, dedication, and self-belief. She taught them to listen to the music itself, to let emotion guide technique, to find their own voice rather than merely following instructions. Her mentorship was gentle but impactful, providing encouragement and insight that many had never received from formal instruction.